makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part.
Andrew Cuomo, the three-term governor of the state of New York and former COVID pandemic response hero back in early 2020, has resigned today as governor over long-standing, I would say, allegations of sexual misconduct, which have now resulted in the Attorney General of the state of New York releasing a report that showed convincing evidence that, in fact, it crossed the bounds of, you know, appropriate behavior. And despite the fact that he appeared willing to try and ride out this scandal until the end, he finally caved in, probably realizing that there were enough votes to impeach him. And the saga might still not end. I mean, there still might be cases against him. He might even possibly face jail time, hopefully. But I don't want to make this video about Andrew Cuomo because, quite frankly, there's not much I have to say about him. You want to read the allegations, go read the summary of the Attorney General's report. But I want to discuss why on earth liberal centrists fell for this guy. Because there was a point last year at the height of the pandemic and as the US presidential campaign was, the Democratic primaries were underway, that it seemed that Cuomo was really the guy that could beat Trump, even though he never ran as a candidate. He, on numerous occasions, said that he was not looking for the presidency. There was no shortage of news coverage, kind of wondering whether he might actually run or whether he was a more suitable candidate than Biden was at the time. So how on earth did they fall for him? Did they fall for him? That is a question that I want to discuss. But first, I want to show you the video of him giving his apology. This was a few days earlier. This is not his apology, his resignation video. This was his apology video a couple of days ago. And he made a very creepy montage where he basically justified his, how shall I say it, his touchy-feely habits by proving that he does it to everyone, which is probably not what you really want to say. So let's watch this.
The New York Times published a front page picture of me touching a woman's face at a wedding and then kissing her on the cheek. That is not front page news. I've been making the same gesture in public all my life. I actually learned it from my mother and from my father. It is meant to convey warmth, nothing more. Indeed, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of photos of me using the exact same gesture. I do it with everyone, black and white, young and old, straight and LGBTQ, powerful people, friends, strangers, people who I meet on the street. After the event,
Dude, you should not be using that as an argument for your sexual harassment allegations. Let's just say you shouldn't be anyone, like no one should be in the habit of touching other people like that. I'm not saying that anything that he showed in this video constitutes sexual harassment, but a lot of these pictures clearly are probably not what the person receiving his affection would have wanted, you know, getting kissed randomly by this guy. I mean, I'm sorry, that's just inappropriate. Whether it's a guy or a woman, it's inappropriate. So, yeah, I don't see how this could help him in any way. But it's a testament to just how deluded he was about his own power and the his desperation to stay in a post where he was probably going to win a fourth term next year. And unfortunately there's no term limits for New York governor, so God knows how long he could have stayed in that position. But anyway, let's move on to how the liberal media covered Andrew Cuomo at the height of his popularity, and it was nothing short, like, this was worthy of Pravda back in the USSR. This would be worthy of your typical authoritarian regime with no freedom of the press. So by far the biggest culprit was CNN, and there's a reason for that, and that's because one of their most popular anchors is Chris Cuomo, who is the younger brother of Andrew Cuomo. And there was one particular character who seemed to be Cuomo's number one fan, or number two fan, because clearly Chris was the number one fan. But Chris Elisa was just absolutely insane over Andrew Cuomo. There's no shortage of CNN pieces where he basically just is urging him, blatantly urging him to run for president. So here's one. Andrew Cuomo said he'll never run for president. That's a mistake. Andrew Cuomo may be the single most popular politician in America right now. This piece where he's again sort of showing how even if he doesn't run for 2020, he could possibly he should probably run in 2024 or 2028. Let's just watch this. This is demented, by the way.
Now, Cuomo is 62 years old. For the sake of argument, let's say Joe Biden loses to Donald Trump this November. The Democratic nomination would then be wide open in 2024 when Andrew Cuomo will be just 66 years old. Or let's say Biden wins in November. If he serves 8 years, the Democratic nomination for president will be again open, although presumably Biden's VP would run in 2028, when Andrew Cuomo will be 70, the same age Elizabeth Warren was when she ran for president in 2020, and almost a decade younger than the last two 2020 candidates, Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. So there's no guarantee that Cuomo will run for president under either of those scenarios. He may not, honestly. But neither of those scenarios are totally implausible. In fact, they're decidedly plausible, given Cuomo's massively raised national profile from his work in New York on the coronavirus and the legacy that performance is likely to leave. Politicians, particularly those with a profile like Cuomo's, should never rule out a run for president. Life has a way of changing your best laid plans, and that is the point. We make new plans.
Indeed, life has a way of changing your plans, whether that be running for a fourth term for governor, which clearly is not going to happen. But you get the picture. You see how this was liberal obsession. You know that emoji of like the happy face with the stars in their eyes? Whenever I see that emoji, I associate it with liberal centrists fawning over something or someone. And when I hear something like this, that's the emoji that comes to mind immediately. But it wasn't just CNN, which had clearly his number one and number two fans. It was pretty much the entire ecosystem of the US liberal media, and even segments of the non-liberal media. I'm going to show you. There's New York Times. How Cuomo, once on the sideline, became the politician of the moment. The New Yorker, Andrew Cuomo, the king of New York. Even the Wall Street Journal, Biden Cuomo is the way to beat Trump. Washington Post, no one does it like Andrew Cuomo. Even the smaller papers, Philadelphia Inquirer, Andrew Cuomo for president, Joe Biden should make it happen. Boston Herald, Joe Biden replaced by Andrew Cuomo, not so far-fetched. You see where this is going. And this is my favorite one, Vogue. Why we are crushing on Andrew Cuomo right now. There you go. And let's look at his actual record now. Now that we've seen the delusion and the derangement of the liberal media, let's see what his actual record on coronavirus is. This is today. The statistics for every state in the US ranked by deaths per capita. How bad was the first wave in New York that New Jersey and New York are still the number one and the number two states in terms of deaths per million population. These are insane numbers. These are like the levels that you see in Brazil. Okay? That's how bad it was. And much of the reason was because they delayed when they started their lockdown. They waited like 2 weeks after a lot of cities on the West Coast started locking down back in early March. And that was, a 2 week delay back in March when the disease was spreading like wildfire had the potential of raising your total death count by a huge amount, because deaths are cumulative. So I've read some estimates of something like 60 or 80% of New York's deaths could have been avoided if they had locked down at the same time as some other cities on the West Coast. And that was the same mistake, for example, Britain made, because Britain also waited like 2 weeks after a lot of continental European countries started locking down. And they had a worse first wave than many of those countries. Even countries that actually started with rising COVID cases before Britain did. So that's his record. And this is not just him as well. This includes the administration of de Blasio in New York. But yeah, those are the numbers. Now, what else has he been accused of? Well, he was accused of withholding nursing home deaths. Apparently 15,000 New Yorkers in care homes died since the start of the pandemic. And yet, just over half of them were actually recorded. And there was... the parallels with New York and Britain are really incredible, because New York also did something that Britain did, which was send elderly hospital patients back to nursing homes without any testing, etc. So they ended up bringing coronavirus to the nursing homes, and a lot more people in nursing homes died than they should have had. So practically the exact same mistake. Like the same liberal centrists who were like criticizing Boris Johnson for his failed pandemic response in Britain were saying absolutely nothing about Andrew Cuomo, which goes to show you why they don't really care about the issues. They just care about who is doing those issues. But what else? That's not the only problem. I mean, there were a lot of cities that also had bad pandemic responses, but it's the legacy of Cuomo's stint as governor and how he essentially ran his state's healthcare system down. That is most important. And here was a very good piece in The Nation, which described pretty much everything that he did in the years before the pandemic. And the opening 2 paragraphs are great. I'm just going to read them. As the novel coronavirus rages in New York, killing more than 1,000 and locking down millions, Governor Andrew Cuomo has emerged as a hero of the moment. On television, he is everything Donald Trump is not, calm, coherent, and blunt, in a strangely reassuring way. He is becoming a hashtag resistance hero. By the way, the hashtag resistance thing was such bullshit. Like, such bullshit. It was basically just, again, liberal centrists thinking they were some kind of like anti-Trump revolutionaries. But anyway, some people are literally falling in love with him. But the same Cuomo who is racing to expand New York's hospital capacity and crying out for more federal resources is quietly trying to slash Medicare funding in the state, enraging doctors and nurses and elected officials of his own party. The same Cuomo who holds press briefings at a major New York City convention center, now the home of a temporary 1,000-bed hospital, presided over a decade of hospital closures and consolidations, prioritizing cost savings over keeping popular healthcare institutions open. So this was known. This was not news. If any of these fake-ass journalists in the liberal media had bothered to investigate, they would have known all this. But they didn't. Because they're not really journalists. They're propagandists. Now, what is my issue here? Like, my issue here is the mentality of these liberal centrists, and why they put someone like Andrew Cuomo on a pedestal that he did not deserve to be in. Even if you didn't do your research and saw all that he did to run down the state's healthcare system, etc., you should have at least seen that New York's response to the pandemic was terrible from the very beginning. Absolutely terrible. And that's why they ended up being hardest hit compared to any other city in New York during the first wave. So, what is it about liberal centrists? Why do they fall for these people all the time? All the time. And I'm going to explain to you. So, what are the characteristics of liberal centrists? Well, the first point that I would make is that they are absolutely obsessed with appearing unideological and bipartisan. They love to reach across the aisle. Basically, anything that doesn't show a clear allegiance with a party or an ideology. And yet that same obsession actually is what makes you an ideologue. Like when you're so obsessed with not appearing ideologically obsessed, guess what? You are obsessed. It's the same obsession. Now, I say ideology, but I actually don't think liberal centrism is an ideology. It's a means to power. Centrism is the way in which you can successfully navigate through different political currents. If the center left is losing, then you jump ship to the center right, and vice versa. And you're still in that same sort of zone. There's no difference in, for example, economic policy between the center left and the center right in the US. So, you can keep your donor base, you can keep all your free market think tanks happy, insofar as you sort of move within the accepted ranges, right? Don't go too far to the right because then you're a populist. That's bad. Don't move too much to the left because then you're a progressive or a left populist. That's equally bad. You just have to stay in that zone, regardless of how much to the left or to the right you are. But in that zone, you're safe. And an example of this, I think by far the best example of this, is the Lincoln Project. These moderate Republicans who supported Biden's run. And liberals loved them. Absolutely. They were gushing over them. They were just fawning over the Lincoln Project because it was their example of like, oh, look, these guys have integrity. It's like, no, the Lincoln Project and your standard establishment Democrat are the exact same thing on policy. And rest assured that the Lincoln Project would have also existed, it would also have emerged if it was Bernie Sanders running against a moderate Republican. It was not because of Trump. I'll just put it that way. Now, what else? And I think the Cuomo case is very, very relevant to this point, which is liberal centrists are terrible, terrible judges of character. Like, you will not find people on earth with worse judgments of character than liberal centrists, because they really only care if a politician fits into this mold that I just described. Then all the criticism over them disappears. That's why they didn't bother investigating Andrew Cuomo. That's why they didn't speak about anything that he did. His record on healthcare, his kind of mafioso style of leadership in Albany. These were all known facts. But none of this mattered because at this point in 2020, liberals and their Trump derangement syndrome was all that they cared about. They were only obsessed by, how we can beat Trump. That's it. And my final point is hypocrisy. Nobody who had like #MeToo, #BelieveWomen, #BLM, #women's rights are human rights, all that bullshit in their Twitter profiles, the same people who kept calling Trump a sex pest, none of them said a peep about Cuomo when his sexual harassment allegations emerged. None of them did. Just like none of them said a peep when Biden himself was accused of sexual assault by Tara Reid. So, seriously, like, what the fuck? Why are these people promoting these genuinely good causes only by virtue signaling on Twitter with hashtags. But then when it's someone on their side who gets accused of this, not a peep. Complete silence. It's like it never happened. Or worse, find a way of, character assassinate the people who are accusing them. So, thankfully, a significant part of the Democratic establishment has now turned against Andrew Cuomo. So you might suddenly start hearing some of these same people come out and say that, oh yeah, well, actually he was a sex pest, despite the fact that you spoke nothing about this over the last couple of months. But yeah, those are the characteristics of liberal centrists, which led to this fiasco. And then they wonder why they keep falling for these same people over and over and over again. Because it is this lack of judgment of character that is so consistent with liberal centrist ideology. And then it comes back and bites them in the ass. And they do they learn from this? No, they don't. They will find their new heroes who fit this mold of being bipartisan. We reach across the aisle. We don't want to be too far to the left or too far to the right. Populism is bad. Same people, same shit candidates, same shit politicians who keep getting the US into mess after mess after mess, who don't solve any of the structural problems in that country. Those are the ones that liberal centrists will always, always support and then end up regretting it. So, let's end on a happy note. Let's watch probably the most ridiculous segment. So back when, like I said, his number one fan was Chris Cuomo, CNN anchor, and his younger brother. And during a time during the pandemic, he would frequently appear on Chris Cuomo's show, and it would be like it would be basically the worst sitcom on US television, the Cuomos. And here's probably the most ridiculous one. So let's just watch and enjoy this bygone era. By the way, Chris Cuomo should be fired. Like, he has been, I think he's sort of like on leave right now. But CNN should really have the balls to fire his ass, because there is a massive conflict of interest there that they just completely glossed over. But anyway, let's watch.
You had video come out before we go to break where you wanted to encourage people to get tested, and some people are afraid it's going to hurt. So you had video of it that I want to show the audience of you actually getting tested. Here it is. There's you were kind of funny, and they were testing you. Now, a few questions about this process. First of all, is it true that when you were having the test administered, you inhaled and the doctor's finger went all the way up your nose and got stuck and had to be released with a tool? Is that true? Just to deal with the record.
She wanted to comment that I have a little button nose, and she was afraid that the swab would actually hurt because it extended my nasal cavity.
The proboscis
she was
issue.
Speaking about the delicacy of the
nose. Yes. And that's what, you know what, I understand. This is the normal swab I'm holding up here now for everybody at home. A very valuable object. There's only one company in the entire country that makes these up in Maine. All right, here's the swab.
By the way, only Americans aren't aware that this is political propaganda. Only Americans.
Is it true that this was the swab that the nurse was actually using on you, and that at first it went into your nose and disappeared, so that in scale, this was the actual swab that was being used to fit up that double-barrel shotgun that you have mounted on the front of your pretty face?
See, I said I was going to be nice and sweet.
I just want a yes, no.
And
was it trying. This?
I was trying.
Or was it this?
Very hard. Look.
Which was it?
You know, first, I thought I did so well on that nasal test standing up there. She did the swab. I did not flinch. I was a cool dude in a loose mood. Didn't move.
Of course you
anything.
were.
I was happy.
That swab is like a piece of lint going in that thing in your face.
That's
How
I think we've seen enough. But can you imagine if like Fox News did that with Trump and his sons, for example? Liberals would be completely outraged. But I guess the Cuomos have been cancelled. What a shame. Moments we will never see again.
All those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain.
And on that note, hope you enjoyed this video. Please share it with your liberal centrist friends. And aside from that, please give it a like. And if you did, please consider subscribing for more liberal centrist bashing content in the near future. Thanks for watching.